When Grandma passed away, my brother Anton and I were summoned to the notary's office to hear the will. I was nervous but still hoped for a fair share. Anton was successful, living in the capital, always adored by Grandma, and I, Olga, was just a quiet librarian, always feeling overshadowed by him. The atmosphere in the room was suffocating, the scent of old paper and time hanging heavy. The elderly lawyer spoke in a monotone voice. The 3-bedroom apartment in the capital is bequeathed to my grandson, Anton Sergeyevich. Anton smirked, glancing at me smugly. I clenched my fists, swallowing my anger. Then he continued reading. The house in the village of Zarecha, including all the land and structures, is left to my granddaughter, Olga Sergeyevna. I was stunned. Zarecha, a remote village with a shabby house I had only visited as a child. This felt no different from saying I was only worthy of leftovers. Anton burst out laughing. At least you got something. That wreck probably only suits chopping firewood. I didn't reply. My throat tightened, humiliation squeezing my heart. After signing the documents and receiving the keys, I left the office in a daze. My husband, Igor, was waiting outside. Without a word of concern, he snapped. So? When I told him about the village house, his face darkened. Useless. You never achieve anything worthwhile. Others get an apartment. And you? Just trash. I tried to explain, but Igor cut me off, shouting, I'm tired of carrying you. Pack your things and get out. I stood frozen. The rented house, where Igor and I once lived, was no longer a place I could stay. No one stood by me now. All I had left was the key to that old village house. Without thinking much, I packed up my belongings and caught the bus to Zarecha. I didn't know what awaited me there. I only knew I had to leave the city, a place filled with betrayal, contempt, and pain. I needed somewhere to start over. And maybe, just maybe, that crumbling house would be the place where everything begins. On the rickety old bus swaying along bumpy roads, I sat in silence, gazing out the window. Blurred, grayish scenery drifted past, barren fields, leafless forests, silent villages. Everything seemed to mirror the turmoil inside me. I didn't know where I was going, or what awaited at the place called Zarecha, but at least, it wasn't the city where I had just been cast aside. I thought of Grandma, her gentle eyes, her soft voice telling old fairy tales. Back then, I was just a child, but I clearly remembered the feeling of safety when sitting beside her. Perhaps, she had still left me something, not in words, but from the heart. The bus stopped in the middle of a deserted village as dusk settled in. Zarecha was eerily quiet. Old wooden houses lined the road, their walls peeling, roofs tilted. Time seemed to have stopped here years ago. I dragged my suitcase across the moss-covered dirt road, my heart pounding. The house Grandma left me came into view, worn down, fragile, surrounded by an overgrown garden choked with weeds. The heavy wooden door stood ajar as if waiting for someone to return. I took a deep breath and stepped inside. I expected a dreadful scene, dust, mildew, rats and roaches, but no. Inside, the house was strangely clean and orderly. The furniture was old but sturdy. The air smelled of dust and rotting wood. Yet there was no dampness like I had imagined. Everything evoked the feeling that someone had cared for this place. The old photographs on the wall stopped me in my tracks. Unfamiliar yet strangely familiar faces looked down at me. They were family. My ancestors. I sensed something more alive than the silence that blanketed this place. A past that had never truly disappeared, only waited for me to come back. I quietly walked through each room, a rising curiosity stirring within me. This place wasn't just a house. It was a part of me, part of the blood that ran through my veins. And I had a feeling that everything Grandma left me was only beginning to reveal itself. The house, which I had thought would be just a temporary shelter, began to feel like something much more. The initial sense of desolation faded. Now, every room seemed to carry the breath of time, whispering forgotten stories. When I entered the last room, I noticed a small door tucked away in the corner, almost blending into the old wall. It wasn't a typical room door. It looked more like a storage cabinet that had been carefully hidden. I tried to open it, but the door was locked, the rusty hinges groaning as I twisted. It took a while of struggling before the lock finally gave in. The creaking of the hinges echoed loudly in the stillness. And then I froze. Behind the door wasn't a storage space, but a secret room, a miniature library. Tall shelves stretched up to the ceiling, filled with books of all sizes, colors, and bindings. Some were intricately embossed in gold on leather covers. Others were simple with yellowed paper spines. There were no windows, but small ventilation slits kept the room dry and clean. I stepped in, feeling as if I had just discovered a treasure. These books were more than objects. They held the breath of knowledge, of history, and the soul of the one who collected them. How could I have imagined that the grandmother I once thought only busy with cooking had secretly possessed such a magnificent trove of wisdom? I ran my fingers along the spines of the books, feeling the texture of aged leather, inhaling the scent of old paper, immersed in the sacred stillness of the room. I had never been much of a book lover, but standing in that space, I felt a fierce desire awaken, to explore. A new world had just opened, one of knowledge, of memory, of family. Many of the books were in foreign languages. I recognized French, German, even Latin and ancient Greek, languages I had once studied briefly in school. Now suddenly returning to me with a captivating allure. I picked up a thick leather-bound volume, opened it, and was stunned to realize it had been printed in the 15th century. I stood there for a long time, heart pounding. This room, this library, was the true gift Grandma had left me, a treasure not only of material worth, but of the soul. After spending hours immersed in the library, I continued exploring the rest of the house. In the basement, I came across a dry and spacious room, rare for such an old wooden house. As I scanned the space, a corner covered by an old tarp caught my attention. I approached and pulled down the fabric, revealing a large, heavy, old metal safe with a combination lock at its center. I tried a few random numbers, but it was useless. Then suddenly, a memory flashed through my mind. Grandma always remembered every grandchild's birthday. It was something she never forgot. Taking a chance, I entered my birth date. Click. The safe door creaked open. I nearly stopped breathing. Inside, there was no gold or cash. Instead, there were things far more precious, bundles of letters tied with ribbon, old photographs, documents, and several soft leather notebooks. I touched them gently, overwhelmed by a strange surge of emotion. These were not just keepsakes, they were memories. Messages from the grandmother who had left me forever. I opened the first letter, written in neat handwriting, slanting gently to the right, the very script I remembered from the days Grandma taught me how to write as a child. My dearest Olinka, the letter began. If you are reading these words, then I am surely gone. And perhaps you are wondering why Anton received the apartment, while you were left with the old, crumbling house. I read through tears. Each word felt as though she were sitting right in front of me, holding my hand, explaining the question that had always haunted me. That decision was not easy. But I understand. Fairness doesn't lie in material things, but in the soul. Anton lives for ambition. But you are the keeper of memory, of tradition, and of the values our family holds dear. I choked up. She was right. Since childhood, I had always felt drawn to old stories, to the small fragments of memory others often overlooked. Those nights beside her, listening to fairy tales, I had unknowingly absorbed a spiritual inheritance that I was only now beginning to understand. She continued, the house in Zarecha is not just an old building, but a symbol of the family, a place of shelter, a guardian of our ancestors' souls. And that library, it is the greatest pride of my life. I preserved it all these years in the hope that someone worthy would continue its legacy. And I believe you are that person. I collapsed beside the open safe, tears streaming down my face. In my hands was not some lifeless piece of property, but a past, a love unconditional. In that moment, I understood. I had not been abandoned, I had been chosen. Grandma had given me the most precious gift of all, the chance to understand myself and live a life of meaning. I sat for hours in the basement, surrounded by letters, documents, and faded photographs, as if an entirely new world had been unlocked. What I found wasn't just her message, it was proof of a priceless cultural legacy I never knew I belonged to. Amid the meticulously arranged documents were expert evaluations of the library. letters from book collectors, and catalogs of rare volumes with origins spanning centuries. One document showed that some books had once belonged to a noble family who owned the land before the Revolution. Another revealed that a few books in the library had been gifts from Emperor Alexander II, a fact that left me stunned and overwhelmed. The more I read, the more I felt that the true value of this treasure lay not just in its age or rarity, but in the connection between knowledge, history, and family. This was the culmination of many generations, a trove preserved through love, gratitude, and responsibility. But what touched me most deeply wasn't the documents, it was an old photo album. As I opened it, I felt as if I were meeting myself again, the innocent little Olga, holding Grandma's hand during forest walks, picking mushrooms, sitting by the oven while she baked, or listening intently to her fairy tales. One photo showed me on her lap, eyes wide, fixed on a book's pages, while her face glowed with tenderness and love. I couldn't hold back the tears. They flowed, not from hurt or sorrow, but from a surge of understanding. She had never seen me as weak or useless. She believed in me, believed that I would be the one to preserve what was most sacred to our family. In the dim basement, holding those old photographs, I no longer felt alone. I saw a part of my life, a love that had never vanished, only waited for me to return. I understood more clearly than ever. The legacy Grandma left me was not just an old house, but faith, memory, and the soul of our family, and I was the one holding the key to it all. I sat in silence for hours in the old room, still clutching the faded photo album. Each picture felt like a slice of memory, taking me back to those innocent days beside Grandma, when life was simple, and my heart was full of trust. In one photo, I, a girl of about 5, sat on Grandma's lap, my eyes sparkling as I listened to her read a story. My face was full of innocence, and her gaze glowed with a love too gentle to be put into words. In that very moment, I burst into tears, but this time, they were no longer tears of disappointment or pain. They were tears of awakening. I had never been abandoned. On the contrary, I had been chosen, not to inherit material things like Anton, but to carry forward something far more sacred: memory, knowledge, the soul of a family. I wiped away my tears. For the first time in many years, I felt something I thought I had long lost: purpose. Grandma had not only left me an old house and a library, she had left me love, trust, and a message that said, "You are worthy." In that moment, I knew I could not, and would not, let this place go. I would not sell the house. I would not trade it for any modern apartment. This was my place, a place where I could live true to myself. Be myself, without comparisons, without being judged by society's cold standards. I would stay in Zarecha, restore the house, and bring it back to life, not for money, not to spite Anton or my ex-husband, but to honor my memories, to protect the love Grandma had given me. I would find someone to repair the house, preserve the library, and learn to cherish every tiny detail within these walls, because every crack, every book, every photo, was a part of me. I stood up and flung open the window. Cool, clean air rushed in, carrying the scent of soil, grass, and the quiet sounds of the countryside. For the first time in years, I felt peace within. This was my new beginning, and I would never look back. After deciding to stay in Zarecha, I felt my soul reborn. I no longer hesitated or feared. I knew exactly where to start. This old house would be the place where I rebuilt my life. I began looking for someone to repair the house. At first, the neighbors were wary. They rarely saw strangers move in here, and even less often a woman trying to restore an abandoned home all on her own. But then an elderly woman named Agafia, who lived nearby, approached me. She was quiet but sincere. Seeing that I was truly serious, she nodded and said, "You need to find Ivan, a skilled craftsman from the next village. He's got gifted hands, and he respects the old things." I sought out Ivan, a quiet man with resolute eyes and sun-darkened hands. After inspecting the house, he shook his head. "There's a lot of work to do. But this place is still solid. If we restore it properly, it'll stand for several more decades." I breathed a sigh of relief. We agreed on the price and timeline. He promised to start the work within a week. After that, I turned my focus to the library, the true treasure my grandmother had left behind. I knew I didn't have the expertise to assess the value of the rare books myself. So, I reached out to antiquarian bookstores in Moscow, sending photos of the most special volumes in the collection. To my surprise, just a few days later, I received a response from a major bookstore. They were intrigued and sent a specialist named Keir to appraise them on site. Keir was a young man, wearing glasses, polite, and deeply passionate about books. He spent hours leafing through each one, taking careful notes, his eyes lighting up with excitement whenever he discovered something unusual. Finally, Keir looked up and smiled. "You're holding a real treasure. Some of these volumes are extremely rare, for example. This one." He pointed to a leather-bound book bearing a royal seal. Its value could rival that of a 3-bedroom apartment in the capital. I was nearly speechless. If just one book was worth that much, what about the entire library? Keir offered to help me appraise the full collection, and even assist with auctioning if I chose to sell. But I wasn't ready to decide. I wasn't sure if I wanted to sell, or if I should do something greater with the legacy my grandmother had entrusted to me. I looked around the book-filled room, then out the window where sunlight touched the old tiled roof. I knew a new chapter was beginning, and I was the one who would write it. That evening, as I sat by the fireplace with a cup of hot tea in hand, the phone suddenly rang. The name on the screen made my heart sink. Anton. I hesitated for a moment, then answered. "Hello, Olga," he said, his voice trying to sound friendly. "How's life in the countryside?" "Must be freezing, huh?" I replied calmly. "Everything is fine. And you? Is the apartment in the capital as comfortable as you expected?" Anton gave a dry laugh. "It's fine, I guess. But I've been rethinking the inheritance. Maybe we both overreacted back then. If you find the country house inconvenient, why not trade? I'll take the house, and you can have the apartment." I almost laughed. He must have just discovered the true value of the library. I kept my composure. "I've done a lot of thinking too, Anton, and I've realized I'm happy with what I have. I won't be making any trades." His voice sharpened a bit. "But it's just an old house in some deserted village. Do you even realize you're giving up the chance to live in the city?" I smiled, looking out the window, where the firelight flickered across the trees in the garden. "You're right, Anton. It is an old house, but it holds things your apartment never will. Memories, history, love, and the soul of a family." There was silence on the other end for a moment. Then Anton replied curtly, "Suit yourself. Don't come crying later." "I won't," I said firmly, and hung up. I set the phone down and sank back into the old armchair beside the fireplace. The steady crackle of burning logs echoed softly, warming the whole room. In the quiet, I felt something strange, relief. No more feeling bound, no more shame, no more trying to please anyone. I was no longer the woman dismissed, seen as a burden. I had become myself, a free, strong woman with purpose, and a place to belong. I looked up at the night sky through the window. The stars shimmered brightly in the stillness. I felt as though I could see Grandma's smile somewhere among them, a gentle smile, full of trust. I turned back to the table, opened an old book, and began to read. Each line was a fragment of history, of family, and of myself. I knew, from that very moment, my life had turned a new page, and I was the one holding the pen. The next morning, I woke with a strange sense of peace. Morning light streamed into the room through the wooden window, casting golden rays across tiny floating dust particles. Outside, the sky was clear. Birds chirped cheerfully on the branches near the gate. The whole village seemed to awaken from a long slumber, and so did I. I stepped onto the porch and took a deep breath. The scent of wet grass, the rich aroma of earth after morning dew, calmed my heart. Everything around me was simple, yet so full of life, a feeling I hadn't found in all those years surrounded by crowded cities and cold relationships. I smiled, for the first time, with my whole heart. I knew I had made the right choice. No more doubts, no more fear. I would live here, restore the house, explore the library, study my family's history, and above all, live a life that was truly mine. Not for anyone else, not to prove anything, but simply to be myself. I went back inside and opened the first book in the library, as if opening the door to the future. A new journey had begun. And this time, I held the key.